The Story of the Nutcracker. It was Christmas Eve, and in a small town in Germany, Clara and her family were preparing a party for all their relatives. But first, they had to decorate the Christmas tree. Every year they brought out the decorations and carefully hung glowing glass baubles and shining foil-wrapped chocolates on the branches. This year there was a new decoration, a beautiful fairy with a purple dress for the top of the tree. Everything was ready, so Clara and her brother Franz played by the light of the fire as they waited for the guests to arrive. Clara dressed up her dolls and brushed their hair, while Franz played with his toy soldiers. Soon, Clara and Franz's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins arrived with presents. Last to arrive was Godfather Drosselmeyer, who always brought extra special presents for all the children. Clara was excited to see what Godfather Drosselmeyer brought her this year. The present was a nutcracker, but no ordinary nutcracker. It was made as a little wooden man, dressed in a red and black uniform. Clara loved her nutcracker. Franz was sure it was a soldier, and so he should have it.
"Let me play with it,"
he said, while trying to take it away from Clara, but she held on tight. In the tug-of-war struggle, the poor nutcracker's leg came off. Godfather Drosselmeyer took the nutcracker gently from Clara, put some glue on his leg, and whispered some magic words. He then told Clara to let the nutcracker rest by the fire while she went off to play with her cousins. "You'll be fine by midnight. Just look out for the mice," he said. Clara had so much fun at the party that she forgot all about her nutcracker and went to bed without him. She awoke suddenly at midnight, remembering her present left alone by the fire. "My nutcracker," she said. She crept downstairs and found him where she'd left him, by the fireside. She picked him up, held him, and stayed there to sleep with her nutcracker in her arms. A short time passed. Then Clara suddenly awoke. She could hear a scrabbling sound coming from the corner of the room. She opened her eyes and saw a group of mice coming towards her, led by a bigger mouse with a little crown on his head. Clara was frightened, but she held on to her nutcracker tightly. From another corner of the room came the sound of drumming. Clara turned and saw Franz's toy soldiers marching towards the mice. The nutcracker moved in Clara's arms and came to life. He leapt up and led the army of toy soldiers to battle. The battle was full of smoke and noise and shouting. Clara couldn't see what was happening, but she knew her nutcracker wasn't safe fighting the Mouse King, so she threw her slipper at the Mouse King, and he fell over. All the other mice ran away, taking their fallen king with them. As Clara turned to her nutcracker, she realized he had grown taller, and now looked like a real person. "I am a prince," he said. "The Mouse King had cast a magic spell to make me a nutcracker forever. You have rescued me." Clara looked in amazement at the Nutcracker Prince. "Come with me," he said. Clara and the Nutcracker Prince flew by magic over glittering, snowy landscapes until they came to a shining white island of sugared icing, where a purple-dressed fairy greeted them. "I have been waiting for you," she said happily. She led Clara and the Nutcracker Prince to a great hall full of people from all over the world who were dancing and feasting. Clara and the Nutcracker Prince sat on thrones and happily watched the entertainment. Soon the party was over, and the fairy tucked Clara and the Nutcracker Prince into a beautiful sleigh. She wrapped a warm blanket around them and said farewell. Clara felt warm and happy as the sleigh flew by magic over the snowy landscapes, and she soon fell asleep. When Clara awoke, she realized she was back home by the fire, and the Nutcracker was in her arms, back to his original size. Franz's toy soldiers were scattered on the floor, and at the top of the Christmas tree was the fairy, smiling down at her. Clara wondered if it had all been a dream. Outside it was daylight, and she could hear the bells ringing. It was Christmas Day, and she had never felt happier. The end. The Story of the Boy Judge. Once upon a time there was a very good man named Ali. He lived in Baghdad, where he had a cake shop. He made wonderful cakes and worked very, very hard and saved all the money he earned. Every month he would put a gold coin in an old olive jar. He did this for many, many years, and one day, when he was already an old man, he realized he could retire. So he took some gold coins from the jar and decided to take a long journey around the world. But before his departure, he took the olive jar with the rest of the gold to his friend Hussein and said, "Hussein, I'm going on a trip and would need you to keep this olive jar for me." Hussein agreed to keep the olive jar and put it on a shelf. 5 years passed, and Hussein forgot about the olive jar, until one day when Hussein's wife needed olives and asked Hussein to get some. He was a very lazy man and didn't want to go to the market, so he decided to take some olives from the jar Ali had left him. When Hussein opened the jar, he discovered that it was full of gold. Hussein took the gold and buried it in his garden. Then he took some olives, filled the jar, and put it back on the shelf. A week later, Ali returned from his journey. He went to Hussein's house and asked for his olive jar. Hussein gave him the jar, but it was full of olives. "Where is my gold?" Ali asked in fury. "What gold? You left an olive jar with me, and I'm giving you your olive jar back," replied Hussein. Ali went straight to the city judge and asked him to resolve the situation, but the judge said, "You cannot prove that there was gold in the jar. How do you expect me to believe you?" Unhappy and upset, Ali decided to go and talk to the Sultan, who was known to be a wise and fair man. The Sultan could not think of a way to solve the problem. He asked Ali to give him one day so that he might reach a decision. Ali agreed and returned home. The Sultan wondered what people in the city were saying about this case, so he decided to disguise himself and wander about the streets, to hear the people gossip. Some people were saying that Hussein was a thief, while others suggested that surely Ali must have come home confused from his trip. The Sultan was about to return home to his palace without a solution when he saw some children playing a game about the very case on which he was working. One boy pretended to be Hussein. Another boy pretended to be Ali, while yet another boy pretended to be the judge. The Sultan observed them for a while, and impressed by the boy judge, he asked the boy to come to the palace the next day. The following day in the palace, the Sultan gathered together Hussein, Ali, the boy judge, and the jar of olives, with a large crowd of people there to watch the proceedings. The Sultan told the boy, "Yesterday I watched you play with your friends, where you were a judge. I thought you were a very good judge, so you shall try this case now." The boy was nervous and uncertain, but he obeyed the Sultan.
Hussein, the boy said, did your friend Ali leave the jar of olives with you?
"Yes," replied Hussein.
When did he leave this jar of olives with you, Hussein?
The boy asked. "He left it with me 5 years ago," Hussein replied.
The boy continued and asked, Did you open the jar and taste an olive?
"Oh, no," said Hussein.
Then the boy turned to Ali and said, Give me an olive, please. So Ali opened the jar and gave the boy some olives. The boy ate some. These olives are delicious, he said. I find it very hard to believe that they are 5 years old. In that moment, everyone realized that Hussein had lied and had indeed stolen the gold from his friend Ali. Ali was happy to have his gold back, but he was sad and disappointed because his friend Hussein had tried to trick him. The boy continued to be the city's judge, and over the many years to come, he presided over numerous difficult cases, and he was always known to be a fair and honest judge. The end. The story of the man who went beyond the door. Many years ago, there lived a man called Salem. Salem was a servant in the home of a very rich old man. The old man was good to Salem, but he always looked very, very sad. Although the house was very big, Salem had been in every room except the room with the silver door. Salem had been working in the house for more than 20 years, and that door had always been locked. One day, the curious Salem asked the old man for whom he worked, "Pardon me, master, but can you tell me what is behind that silver door?" "I cannot tell you," the old man replied. "You must be happy with what you have." Some years passed, and the old man passed away, leaving his house and all his money to Salem. Salem was now a very rich man, yet he was not happy. He wanted to know what secret that silver door was hiding, so he decided to break the lock and open the door. Behind the door was a very dark cave. Salem entered the cave, and a little further on he saw a large, ugly bird. Before he could do anything, the bird caught hold of Salem and flew with him out of the cave. The bird flew into the sky and over the sea. The bird flew for many hours, and then he set Salem down in a magnificent garden where a beautiful woman was waiting for him. "You are here, my love," the woman said. "I'm so happy to see you. Everything here is mine. Stay with me, and you'll be a happy man." Salem fell immediately in love with the woman, and was so amazed by the beautiful, strange land in which the bird had left him. So he replied, "I'd love to stay with you." The woman took Salem and showed him around. The garden had lots of fruit trees, and hundreds of birds sang lovely melodies. Nearby there was a palace where Salem would live. He had never seen so much luxury. Then the woman pointed to a golden door and said to Salem, "You may go anywhere in the garden or in the palace, but not through this door. If you open this door, you'll be unhappy for the rest of your life." Years went by, and Salem indeed lived happily. But for every year that passed, he became more and more curious about that golden door. He thought to himself, "When I opened the silver door, I found this lovely place. Perhaps behind the golden door, I'll find a place even more wonderful than this." So one day, Salem went ahead and opened the golden door. Everything was dark inside, and Salem stepped in. But in a short while, he saw the large, ugly bird. Before he could run away, the bird caught him in its claws again and flew up into the sky. Salem wondered where the bird would take him this time, but the bird simply took him back to the cave from whence he began this journey, setting Salem down at the silver door. Then the bird flew away. Salem waited for many days for the bird to return, but the bird never did. Salem then went back through the door to his old house. He realized then that the old man had gone through the very same experience as he had done. The bird never returned, nor did Salem ever go back to the garden. I should have been happy with what I had. Now he understood. The end. The story of the most beautiful woman in the world. There was once a very large village where many people lived. It had many roads, many stores, and the king's castle on the top of the mountain. One day, a carpenter was walking back to his shop when suddenly he saw a little boy crying. He approached the little boy and asked, "Why are you crying, little boy?"
"I've lost my mother,"
the little boy replied. The carpenter felt sorry for the boy and decided to help him. "Don't worry, I'll help you find her. What does your mother look like?" The boy replied,
"My mother should be easy to find. She is the most beautiful woman in the world."
"The most beautiful woman in the world? Who could that be?" the carpenter thought. The lady from the flower shop is very good-looking." So the carpenter decided to take the boy to the flower shop. When they got to the flower shop, the carpenter asked the boy, "Is this your mother?"
"Oh, no," the boy replied. "My mother is much more beautiful than this lady."
Both the carpenter and the lady from the flower shop were curious. Who could she be?
"There is a new lady working as a hairdresser at the beauty parlor," the flower shop lady said. "She is very pretty. Maybe she is the mother of this boy."
So they all went to the beauty parlor. Once they got there, they met the new hairdresser of the beauty parlor, and she was indeed very pretty.
"Is this your mother?" the carpenter asked.
No, no, my mother is the most beautiful woman in the world. Everyone was intrigued. The carpenter, the flower shop lady, and all the ladies from the beauty parlor marveled at who could be this boy's mother. "Do you remember the beauty pageant last week?" a lady asked. "I know where the winner lives. Maybe she's this little boy's mother." So they all went to meet the winner of the beauty pageant. When they reached her home and knocked, a tall young woman with golden hair came to the door. She was indeed lovely. The carpenter, dazzled by her charms, asked the boy,
"Is this your mother?"
"Oh, no. I've already told you that my mother is the most beautiful woman in the world." Everyone was fascinated. This boy's mother was more beautiful than every single woman in the world? Who could she be? Suddenly, they gazed in the direction of the castle on top of the mountain. Could this boy belong to the princess, they wondered? They decided to bring the boy to the castle. There was already a crowd of villagers joining them. All were intent on finding out who the mother of this boy could be. At long last, they reached the castle on top of the mountain and approached the princess's rooms. The princess was considered to be the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. She dressed in only the finest clothes. She had long, flowing hair, and her skin was as smooth as silk.
"Pardon me, your highness," the carpenter said, "but this boy is looking for his mother, and, well, we thought—"
But quickly the boy interrupted. "This is not my mother. My mother is the most beautiful woman in the world." Everyone was speechless. How could this boy's mother be even more beautiful than the princess? Just then, a plump little woman with wind-blown curly hair suddenly came rushing into the princess's chambers. "Oh, my son, my son! I've been so worried. I've been searching everywhere, and I've finally found you," she said, as the boy quickly ran to hug the woman. The people stopped and stared, confused with this new turn of events. The carpenter was the first one to recover his voice and said,
"But, begging your pardon, ma'am, this boy has been saying that his mother is the most beautiful woman in the world. How can that be?"
"Oh," the boy's mother replied, "it's obvious that none of you have any children of your own. For if you did, you would know that through a child's eyes, his mother is always the most beautiful woman in the world." And with that, she gently and lovingly took the little boy's hand in hers, and together they walked happily back to their home. That day, all the people of the village learned a very important lesson from that little boy. Beauty is truly in the eye of the beholder. The end. The story of the Princess and the Salt. A very long time ago, there lived a king and his 3 daughters. One day, the king wanted to find out which of his daughters loved him the most, so he called to his daughters and asked,
"How much do each of you love me, my dears?"
The eldest daughter replied, "I love you as much as I love gold." The king was happy. The second one replied, "I love you as much as I love diamonds." On hearing this, the king was even happier. But the youngest daughter said, I love you as much as I love salt, dear father." On hearing this, the king was furious.
"How can you say something like that?" he shouted at his youngest daughter. "In your eyes, my value is only as much as mere salt."
He was so angry and humiliated that he banished his youngest daughter to the forest. Sad and rejected, the princess began to wander in the forest, when suddenly she heard the sound of a horse's hooves galloping towards her, and frightened, she hid in the hollow of a tree. The horse halted near the tree, and a handsome young man alighted. He had seen the princess hiding behind the tree. "I am a wealthy merchant," said the young man, "and I live in the neighboring kingdom. What are you doing all alone in this dense forest?" The princess then told him her story. "I love my father very much, but he doesn't understand," she sobbed. "One day he will," consoled the merchant. They quickly fell in love, and soon they were married, and the wealthy merchant brought the youngest princess as his bride to live with him in his mansion. Then one day the king lost his way while hunting. For 2 days he wandered in the forest. Then, as fate would have it, he reached the mansion of the merchant. Hungry and tired, he approached the merchant, presented himself, and sought the young man's help. Although the merchant knew the king was none other than his wife's father, he kept quiet about it. "I shall arrange food for you, your majesty," he said. The merchant then went to his wife, the princess, and told her about her father's arrival. The princess decided to do the cooking herself, and quickly dismissed the cooks. Not long thereafter, a big feast was presented to the king. Starving, he quickly began eating, but then realized the food had absolutely no taste.
"What is this? I cannot imagine that someone could ever eat this food like this,"
said the king as he demanded to speak with the cook immediately. To his astonishment, there stood his daughter in front of him. The princess said, "Hello, father. Your food is horrible because it does not have salt in it. Your life would be terrible without salt, wouldn't it? Do you understand now how much I love you?" The king held his daughter in his arms and apologized to her, promising never to doubt the love she had for him ever again. The end. The story of the unhappy big fish. In a puddle near a big river lived a group of fish. They all were friends and played with each other and were very, very happy. Among them lived a bigger fish. He was very proud, and because he was bigger, he thought of himself as more important than all the other fish. He was always mumbling and grumbling in the company of the little fish. So one day, one of the little fish told him,
"This puddle is too small for you. I'm surprised that you don't go to live in the big river. There you would have much better pals than little fish like us."
The big fish thought about those words, and indeed, he thought that it would be a good idea for him to go to the big river.
"I'm tired of these little fish," he thought to himself. "When the winter comes, I'll be able to leave this puddle and go and live in the big river where I can socialize with more distinguished fish like myself."
Soon the winter came and flooded the puddle, and now the big fish could easily swim to the big river. And how different it was there! The rocks were bigger, the plants were bigger, And so were the other fish, much, much bigger. He was resting near an underwater cave when he felt a strong current, and 4 large fish passed by, pushing him aside.
"Move away, little fish," they said. "Don't you know this cave is reserved for big fish like us?"
Little fish, he thought. He had never been called that. Life in the river was very different from the one in his puddle. He decided to hide in some algae and try to rest. Not long after, though, 2 huge and fearsome fish found him and started to attack him. He escaped by swimming into a little crack in a rock where they couldn't fit. Oh, that was scary. He stayed there for some time, waiting for the other fish to go away, and this gave him time to think. Was this the way life was in the river, he thought? Were these the advantages of living among big fish? He started to miss his puddle and the company of his little fish friends. He realized he had made a mistake, and so he decided to return to his puddle. The journey wasn't easy. He had to swim upstream and be extremely careful not to be attacked by other fish. After several days, he reached his puddle, and how joyful and relieved he felt. There was no other place in the world where he would rather be. The journey had made the big fish a better fish, and he became the best of friends to all the other little fish. He never grumbled again, and he was always ready to tell them stories about the big river and the world beyond, and the little fish were always happy to listen. The end. The story of the secret garden. Mary Lennox lived in India, a very warm and bright country. But one very sad day she was sent to England, where her uncle Lord Craven lived. She was met at the train station by Mrs. Medlock, who worked for Mary's uncle, and together they traveled to Misselthwaite Manor on a foggy night. The enormous building was dark and spooky, and it felt to Mary as if she were lost on the edge of the moor. Mrs. Medlock, who was the housekeeper of the manor, abruptly left Mary with Martha, the young housemaid. Martha was nice. She brought Mary a good dinner and some warm clothes. Mary, however, was very spoiled. She woke up in the morning and coldly commanded Martha, "Dress me." This was the custom in India. Her ayah washed her and dressed her every morning. Days went by. Mary felt so bored. Her uncle was never home, and she had nobody to play with. It was a very cold and rainy winter. One day, Martha gave her a skipping rope. "Why don't you try it? You could wander through the gardens," she cheerfully said to Mary. While she was wandering in the gardens, Mary saw a robin on a tree behind a brick wall. There was a door, but it was locked. "What's beyond this wall?" she thought. The little girl went to Ben, the gardener, and told him to open the door immediately.
"I can't," he answered. "No one can do it since your aunt died 10 years ago. That was her garden."
Mary returned to the house, and she slammed the door because she was very angry with Ben. Suddenly, she heard a cry in the distance. "Where is it coming from?" she thought to herself. There was a massive door at the end of the corridor. Mary opened it and saw a very pale boy lying in a big bed. "Who are you?" they both asked each other. Mary discovered that the boy was her cousin Colin, her uncle's son. They were the same age. Colin was very ill, and he never left his room. The windows had been closed shut, and he never saw the sunlight. Mary promised to visit him every day. The very next day, while she was in her room, Mary heard a pecking at the window. It was the robin, and he was carrying a key in his beak. "Thank you, little friend," said Mary, smiling. Then she ran to the garden. Mary looked around. She was alone. The key easily unlocked the door. Mary passed through the thick ivy branches. She was in the garden. It was so big! The little girl saw a frozen fountain, beautiful statues, and a lot of tall and spooky-looking trees. The ground was all covered by dry leaves. How sad! Suddenly, Mary saw someone. He was an odd-looking boy, and with him were 2 squirrels, a fox, and a crow. "Who are you, and what do you want?" Mary asked. "I'm Dickon, Martha's little brother," he answered, smiling. Dickon could talk to animals and knew all about nature. He was charming. Mary trusted him, and they soon became friends. They explored the secret garden together. "It's all dead," Mary said, hopelessly. "Not at all," Dickon replied. "This garden is as alive as you or me. It will be amazing when the spring will come. The trees, the plants, and the flowers are resting under the snow." Weeks went by so quickly. Every morning, Mary met with Dickon, and they entered the secret garden to plant new seeds and to water the tiny buds. In the evening, she had dinner with her cousin Colin, and she described the garden which was growing day by day. The spring finally came. The snow melted under the sun. The fresh grass was bright green. The robin and the other birds sang on the branches. Mary decided to take Colin into the secret garden so they might play together. One day, Mary and Colin went secretly outside. Mrs. Medlock would never allow Colin to go out of his room. She thought he was too ill, but he wasn't. The garden was full of sweet smells and melodies. Pink and white roses grew and blossomed everywhere. Colin never felt so happy. Mary and Colin were having such a wonderful time in the garden. They didn't realize that the door to the garden had been left open. When Mrs. Medlock discovered them in the garden, she was furious. But then Lord Craven, who had never seen his son happier and healthier before, finally understood that Colin was fine and that he needed to play outside to feel better. So together they all played and laughed in the garden, which was not secret anymore. The end. The story of Don Quixote de la Mancha. Alonso Quijano was a middle-aged gentleman from the region of La Mancha in central Spain. Instead of taking care of his estate, Alonso was obsessed with the chivalrous ideals touted in the books he constantly read. He would imagine himself as a knight, riding his noble steed, defending the helpless and destroying the wicked. One day he went to his neighbor, a simple man called Sancho Panza, and told him, "Sancho, I have decided that I will become a brave knight, and I would like you to become my faithful squire." Sancho didn't quite understand what was going on, but he agreed to go along with his neighbor. Alonso went back home and put on his grandfather's dusty and rusty armor. Then he chose an old horse to ride upon and gave a donkey to Sancho.
"Beware, world! I am Don Quixote, a brave and noble knight, and this is my horse Rocinante. Off we go, Sancho," he said, and they both went riding to a nearby village called El Toboso.
As Don Quixote and Sancho Panza proudly rode through the streets of El Toboso, the villagers looked curiously at the two strange characters and wondered who they could be and what they could be doing. Quite unexpectedly, Don Quixote and Sancho rode past a young peasant woman who was working in the fields. She was a rather brawny girl, well built and sturdy, but through Don Quixote's imaginative eyes, she looked like the most beautiful and delicate maiden he had ever seen, and he even imagined a name for her.
"Her name is Dulcinea. Her rank must be at least that of a princess, since she is my queen and lady, and her beauty superhuman, since all the impossible and fanciful attributes of beauty which the poets apply to their ladies are verified in her. For her hairs are gold, her forehead Elysian fields, her eyebrows rainbows, her eyes suns, her cheeks roses, her lips coral, her teeth pearls, her neck alabaster, her bosom marble, her hands ivory, her fairness snow. And what modesty conceals from sight such, I think and imagine as rational reflection can only extol, not compare," he told Sancho.
Sancho was confused.
"See, Sancho," Don Quixote tells him, "this is our purpose, to protect such a lovely maiden from the dangers of the world." "Don't worry, Dulcinea. Don Quixote is here to fight the bad and wicked," he shouted back as they continued their journey.
Don Quixote and Sancho were resting under a tree when suddenly they see a big cloud of dust approaching and hear a loud noise.
"Look, Sancho," shouts Don Quixote, "an enemy army approaches. Give me my lance and shield."
Don Quixote jumps onto Rocinante and quickly charges, but it was just a big flock of sheep, so Don Quixote sees himself alone in the middle of hundreds of running sheep. Of course, that Don Quixote, he could see enemy soldiers amidst the sheep that were running past him.
"Stay here and fight, you cowards!"
he shouted loudly as he tried to manage his lance. Sancho would look at this, not knowing what to think. There were so many sheep running that eventually Don Quixote lost his balance and fell from his horse. Sancho ran to help him up.
"They were too many, Sancho, but I have fought well, haven't I?" Don Quixote asked.
"Yes, you did," Sancho replied to him. Don Quixote and Sancho continue their journey through the night. A big storm approaches, and quickly rain, wind, and lightning turn Don Quixote's journey even more difficult. The wind blew so strong that they even have difficulty moving forward. Don Quixote comes around a hill where some windmills are spinning fast due to the wind speed. Illuminated by the lightning, the windmills look mysterious, and for Don Quixote's imagination, those were not windmills.
"Look, Sancho," he said. "Giants! Giants everywhere!"
Of course, Sancho could not see any giant, only windmills. Suddenly, Don Quixote could see Dulcinea being held captive on one of the giant's hands.
"Dulcinea! Dulcinea!" he shouted. "I'll come and save you!"
And he charged toward the windmill that, for him, was a giant who had captured his love, Dulcinea.
"Fear not, Dulcinea! I am coming! Prepare to feel my lance, evil creature!"
he said as he prepared to strike. Of course, that poor Don Quixote speared the sail of the windmill and got stuck there, spinning around and around for hours until the wind calmed down and he eventually fell on the ground. Don Quixote had been defeated. He was beaten and depressed. Sancho took his master back home, while Don Quixote tried to figure out exactly what had happened. Returned to his estate, Don Quixote realized that all his adventures were simply a product of his imagination. Don Quixote never embarrassed himself further by going on any more quests, but his house would always be full of children to whom he would tell the most fantastic stories about knights, squires, and noble quests, and all lived happily together, going on many, many more adventures in their imagination. The end. The Story of Frankenstein. Dr. Victor Frankenstein was a brilliant scientist, obsessed with the idea of creating life. He would spend long hours every single day, isolated in his lab, experimenting with new ways of achieving his lifelong desire. After many missed experiments, Victor would try again and again. This time, he had stitched together bits and pieces of various dead bodies he had dug up at the local cemetery, and had sewn them together into a giant greenish form that now laid on his operating table. Victor had connected wires to the body, and all he needed now was an electrical storm. With the electricity provided by the lightning, he would then be able to reanimate the dead body into a living one. Finally, a stormy night came, and Victor flipped the switch that brought electricity to the body in a shower of sparks and lightning. At first, nothing happened, but then, suddenly, Victor saw a finger move. The creature had gained life, and as he stood up, he bellowed,
"Father!"
Alarmed, Victor ran away, leaving his creature to sit up and take his first look at the world, alone and scared. The monster roared as he called out,
"Father! Where are you?"
Shaking with fear, Victor hid himself in a closet, waiting and praying for the monster to just go away. After what seemed like hours in the dark, there was silence. Victor opened the door and peeked into the room. The window was broken, and the monster was gone.
"Oh, what have I done?"
Victor groaned, slumping over his desk. If anyone were to find this monster and discover that it was Victor who made him, it would spell doom for his career and for his family. He decided that he had no choice but to hunt his creature down and destroy it. Meanwhile, The creature learned the basics of life on its own in the woods: how to eat, how to sleep, how to survive. He learned to speak and write by hiding in the shadows of the forest, while he watched through a kindergarten classroom window and stole books to read at night when no one was there. Weeks passed, and Victor continued to patrol the streets late at night with his gun. One night, he was looking up and down a foggy street when a large shadow emerged from a dark corner behind him.
"Father!"
The creature called out. Victor went pale, and he gripped his gun with sweaty palms. He turned around slowly and saw the all too familiar frame of the monster he had created.
"Stay back!"
said Victor, gripping his gun anxiously.
"Put that down! You'll hurt yourself. I intend you no harm,"
the creature said, with a sad look in his eyes.
"How can I know that? You are a beast!"
accused Victor.
"And whose fault is that? You made me this way, and then you abandoned me, forcing me to live in the shadows like a monster." "You are a monster!"
Victor shouted.
"No, father. A monster is something you choose to be, not something based on your appearance. You, father, are the real monster, but don't worry. You will not see me again,"
the creature replied.
"I've decided to live far away, deep in the woods, away from all the unfair judgments of mankind."
And with that, he vanished into the night. Victor returned home, at first feeling relieved. However, as he thought about what the creature had said, he realized the creature was right. The world was indeed full of monsters, but was now without a pure and decent man. The creature, though, lived happily in the woods from that time on, surrounded by beautiful nature and gentle animals who never ever judged him for how he looked, but only for his good deeds. The end. The story of the fish and the fishing rod. A long time ago, in a village in China, there lived a man called Zheng. Zheng was a fisherman, and every day he would go to the river to fish. One day, when he was coming back from fishing, Zheng met a very poor man sitting by the side of the road.
"Can you help me, please?"
the man asked Zheng.
"I'm very hungry."
Zheng had a good heart, so he gave the man the biggest fish he had.
Thank you,
said the man, and off went Zheng back home. The next day, Zheng took his fishing rod and went down to the river. The sun was shining brightly, and Zheng had a delightful time fishing. On his return trip home, Zheng met the very same man sitting on the ground.
"Good evening, mister. Could you spare me a fish?"
he said.
"I haven't eaten anything since yesterday."
Zheng agreed to give another fish to the poor man, who thanked Zheng dearly for his act of kindness. And Zheng went on his way. A wise old man from the village saw Zheng giving the fish to the poor man, and decided to go and talk with Zheng. "Zheng," the old man said, "I just saw you giving a fish to that man. Do something for me. Tomorrow, bring an extra fishing rod and take that man fishing with you." Zheng did not quite understand, but he agreed to do what the wise old man had asked of him. So the next morning, Zheng took an extra fishing rod and went searching for the poor man. After a while, he found him, and he asked the man to accompany him down to the river. and the man agreed. Once on the river, Zhang gave the man his other fishing rod. The man had never seen a fishing rod before, so Zhang began to explain to him how to manage it. After some time, the man began to understand how to fish. He stood there watching Zhang fish, and they both spent a lovely afternoon together. When the sun was setting, Zhang gave the man a fish for his dinner, and then each man returned to his home for the evening. The very next day, Zhang went to the river as usual, and to his astonishment, there was the man fishing with the fishing rod Zhang had given him only the day before. The man had already caught 3 big fish. Zhang spent the day fishing with the man. They had the best of times and became very good friends. The man caught so many fish that he didn't have to ask Zhang for any. On his way home, Zhang met the wise old man again and was excited to tell him what had happened. The old man smiled and said, "You see, Zhang, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for life." The end. The story of Saint George and the Dragon. A long, long time ago, in a faraway kingdom, there was a large cave. In this cave lived a dragon. If the dragon would breathe on a person, they would die on the spot. At first, the dragon was sleeping in his cave for many years, and so he did not disturb the villagers. But one day, he woke up and threatened to kill them, one and all. People had no choice but to come to terms with the dragon. They agreed to give him 1 person every month, so long as he left the others alone and unharmed for the rest of the time. The dragon agreed, but how were they to decide which person to sacrifice? The king decreed that the names of every citizen should be scratched onto pieces of pottery and kept in a great urn. Each month, one of the names would be drawn out of the urn, and that person would be given to the dragon. In this way, men and women, rich and poor, could be chosen to be fed to the evil beast. On the day the first lottery was made, and to everyone's surprise, the name of the princess was shaken out of the urn. According to the king's own law, his daughter must be sacrificed. The king was very, very sad, and he called the people together and offered them gold and treasure if someone would agree to trade places with the princess. The judges who oversaw the lottery said that it must be completely fair, or else the people would no longer accept it. And so, much saddened, the king said to the princess,
"My dear, I shall never see your wedding day."
A week went past, and the day arrived when the princess should meet her fate. The palace servants dressed her in her wedding gown and placed a crown of flowers on her head. They led her out of the city in a procession and headed for the lake near the cave where the dragon lived. The servants knew that this lake was where the dragon cooled himself off in the heat of the day. As they were on their way, a soldier came riding up to the city. His name was George. George stopped and asked why such a beautiful young woman was looking so sad on her wedding day.
A citizen replied,
"Because, according to the law,
She must be offered to the mighty dragon so that he can spare us all."
George immediately replied,
"If that is really the case, then let me slay the dragon and prevent the death of the princess."
The citizens warned him that nobody stood a fighting chance against such a ferocious plague-breathing lizard, but George was determined to save the princess. The people tied the princess to a tree by the lake and left her there to meet her fate. The dragon emerged out of the swampy waters to take the princess, but George charged up on his horse and flung his spear into the dragon's shoulder, but the spear immediately broke against the hard, scaly skin of the dragon. George thought fast and quickly ran towards the princess and cut her free from her bonds. The dragon was enraged and rounded on his attacker. George retreated and took off his belt. Then he threw it at the dragon, and by a miracle, the belt wrapped itself around the dragon's neck like a collar. Immediately, the dragon became as peaceful as a lamb, and both George and the princess were able to lead the dragon back to the city. The people could not believe their eyes. They thought George was a saint because he saved them from the fearsome beast, and so they cried aloud, "Saint George! Saint George! Long live Saint George!" Saint George and the princess got married and lived happily ever after. As for the dragon, well, he also lived with them in the palace and became a good friend of everyone. The end. The story of the Monkey King. Once upon a time, in a mango grove on the bank of a large river, there lived a troop of monkeys. One day, the king of the monkeys called for a meeting. He said,
"My dear monkeys, a human town has come up not far from here. They have never tasted mangoes before now. If they do, they will come and take all our mangoes, and we will be in danger of starving."
So the monkeys decided to pluck all the fruit from the branches that spread over the river, so that no mango could fall and float into the town. But one mango did fall into the water. It floated towards the town and got caught in a fisherman's net. When the fisherman saw the strange fruit, he immediately took it to his king. The king looked at the fruit and called for his advisers.
"What is this fruit?" he asked. "Is it good to eat?"
"Oh yes, your majesty, it is good to eat. That is a mango, and it grows not far from here,"
one of his advisers said. Hearing this, the king cut the mango and ate it. The mango was so juicy and delicious that the king decided to set out to find the tree it came from. Reaching the mango grove, the king ordered his men to gather all the fruits they could. But just then, the Monkey King and his troop, who were hiding up in the mango trees, made such a noise in an effort to frighten them away that the king ordered his archers to shoot them all down. The Monkey King saw the archers and called to his troop to escape.
"Hurry, we are in danger. Everybody run. Follow me."
The Monkey King jumped to a tree branch that stretched over the river and grabbed the branch of another tree on the other side. He then called to the others, saying,
Come, monkeys, climb on my back and cross to the other side of the river."
The monkeys did as they were told, and soon the whole troop was safe. But being in that position, the Monkey King had made himself an easy target for the archers, who pointed their arrows towards him. When suddenly the king said,
"Don't shoot! Don't shoot!"
he had seen how the brave Monkey King had risked his life to save his own kind, and he turned to him and asked,
"Why did you make a bridge out of your own body, knowing that you might be caught?"
The Monkey King smiled wisely and replied,
"My monkeys are safe now. That is all that matters. If you want to be a good king, it is your duty to always put your people first."
The king's eyes filled with tears as he turned to speak to his soldiers.
"This monkey has shown me how to be a real king,"
he declared.
"Let the monkeys have these mango trees and live peacefully with us from now on."
And so the king returned to his palace, and thereafter he became a noble, just, and beloved king. The end. The story of the Phantom of the Opera. Since she was a child, Christine Daae, a beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, traveled around Europe with her father, who was a great musician. Christine loved to sing. Her father used to tell her many stories about the angel of music, the personification of musical inspiration. Christine loved her father's stories, which inspired her to continue to practice her singing. She truly sang beautifully. When they arrived in Paris, Christine met a young boy called Raoul. Since they both loved music, they became great friends. Christine liked Raoul very much, and Raoul felt the very same way about Christine. But her father had to continue his travels around Europe, so Christine had to say goodbye to her dear friend Raoul and resume her journey. After many years had passed, Christine came back to Paris. She had grown into a beautiful woman with a lovely voice, and she was given a position in the chorus at the Paris Opera House, which is called the Palais Garnier. She immediately made an impact with the company because of her stunning looks and heavenly voice. Very soon afterward, she began to hear a hauntingly handsome voice that would give her advice on her singing. "Are you the angel of music?" Christine asked.
"I am," the voice replied, "and I will teach you a little bit of heaven's music."
The voice belonged not to an angel, but to Eric, a strange musical genius who had forever been living in the opera, and was also called the Phantom of the Opera by the opera patrons. The days passed, and Christine became more and more enchanted by the mysterious voice that so knowingly taught her to sing better and better. One special night, Christine made her debut on the opera's stage. Christine triumphed at the gala and garnered tremendous applause from the audience. Her old childhood friend Raoul was also there in the audience at the opera and recalled his love for her. Raoul went to meet Christine afterward,
and they talked for a long time. They were still very fond of each other. Hidden and watching everything was Eric. Some time after the gala, the Paris Opera performed Faust, but against Eric's will, the lead was to be played by the prima donna Carlotta and not by Christine. Angry with the manager's decision, the phantom haunted Carlotta, who got scared and lost her voice. He then cut the rope of the grand chandelier, which plummeted into the audience. In the middle of the confusion, a masked Eric kidnapped Christine and brought her to the cellars beneath the opera stage where he lived, and there he revealed his true identity to her. The voice of the man behind the mask was charming, and Christine began to find herself attracted to her abductor. Curious, Christine gently approached Eric and unmasked him, but to her horror, his face was the face of a monster. Seeing how scared Christine was of him, Eric ran from her in pain and sadness. The following night, during another production of Faust, suddenly a big cloud of smoke appeared, and the lights went out. Eric jumped onto the stage and again took Christine with him.
"You shall marry me, Christine," Eric said, "or I will destroy the entire opera house and bring it down in ruin."
Christine at first refused, but when she remembered Raoul was also in the audience, she agreed to marry Eric. As Eric lifted his mask to kiss her on her forehead, he was surprised to receive a kiss from Christine in return.
"I have never received a kiss," he told her, "not even from my own mother."
Overcome by emotion, he told Christine,
"Go, my angel, and marry Raoul. I know you love him."
Christine ran away to her beloved Raoul, whom she married a short time after. She thought of the phantom many times over the years, but he was never to be seen again, although some people say he still wanders the halls of the Paris Opera House. The end.
The Wooden Horse. A long, long time ago, there was a city named Troy. The city was very rich and had great treasures inside its huge walls. Hearing the stories about the wealth that existed in Troy, the Greek king decided to take his army there to steal their gold. Hundreds of warships with thousands of Greek soldiers sailed to Troy to try to conquer the city, but the Trojans, spotting the invasion, locked themselves into their huge fortress, and no matter what the Greeks tried to do, they could not get in. The Greeks tried everything for years, but it was just impossible to break in. The Greek king was getting furious. Suddenly, one morning and without notice, the Greek army had just disappeared. No Greek soldier was to be seen. The Trojan king decided to send some soldiers to check if the Greek army had indeed retreated in defeat. The Trojans looked and looked, but no Greek was to be found. Suddenly,
they stumbled upon a huge wooden horse. The Trojans all gathered up at the beach, contemplating the horse. "This is an offer from the Greeks," a Trojan said, "to honor us for our victory. Let's take it to our city so we can forever remember the day we defeated the Greeks." "We shouldn't want anything from the Greeks," an old man said. "My advice is that we burn this wooden horse." The king thought and eventually decided to take the horse inside the walls of Troy. The peace had returned to Troy, and everyone returned to their normal lives. After a couple of days, there was a party, and every Trojan went to the forest to celebrate. Suddenly, when everyone was away, a little door in the wooden horse was opened, and hundreds of Greek soldiers who were hidden inside got out of the horse and stole all the gold of Troy, quickly escaping. When the Trojans returned, they were surprised to see how they were tricked by the Greeks. They learned the lesson that sometimes what appears to be a gift can be a trap instead. The end.
The Story of a Midsummer Night's Dream. This story starts in the courtroom of Duke Theseus in Athens. Aegeus is having trouble with his daughter, so he brings her to the Duke, seeking help. Aegeus's daughter Hermia does not want to marry Demetrius, the man to whom her father has promised her in marriage.
"But Hermia, why do you not wish to marry Demetrius?"
the Duke asked. "I'm in love with Lysander the poet, and cannot imagine my life with any other man," Hermia replied. But the law back then said that fathers were allowed to make their daughters marry anyone they wanted them to, so the only other choice for Hermia would be to become a nun and marry no man at all. Since the Duke gave Hermia little choice, that night she decided to run away from Athens with Lysander. They ran and ran deep into the woods, making promises of eternal love to each other. While they are in the woods, they hear someone approaching. Could it be someone who's come to arrest them, they think? But no, it is only Hermia's best friend, Helena. Helena is sad because she loves Demetrius, and he is in love with Hermia. Hermia wishes Demetrius would love Helena in return. Then Hermia could marry Lysander, and all their problems would be solved. The fairies that live in the woods are also having problems. Oberon, the king of the fairies, is angry at his queen, Titania. She is taking care of a little human boy, and Oberon wants to take the boy to be his helper. Titania won't let him, so Oberon decides to play a trick on her. He asks his assistant Puck to find a magical flower whose juices are supposed to make a person fall in love with the first thing they see.
"Use the flower on Titania, Puck," Oberon says. "That way she will totally forget about that little boy."
As the night begins to fall, the lovers from Athens are lost in the woods. Lysander and Hermia are still trying to run away while Demetrius chases them,
and Helena follows, begging Demetrius to love her in return. Demetrius is mean to Helena and says, "Helena, I will never love you. Forget about me." Helena is terribly sad and starts to cry. What Helena doesn't know is that the magical Puck is watching and, feeling sorry for her, decides to help her later. In the meanwhile, in another part of the woods, a group of laborers is practicing a play to perform for Duke Theseus on his wedding day. A man by the name of Nick Bottom is by far the loudest and funniest of them all. He is also a bit of a show-off and wants to play all the parts. Puck watches Nick Bottom and thinks it would be funny to make Queen Titania fall in love with him. Because Puck loves funny things, he decides to cast a spell and turns Nick Bottom's head into a donkey's head. When his friends see him with a donkey head, they are scared and run away screaming, leaving poor Nick Bottom alone in the woods. Nearby, at that very moment, Titania, the queen of the fairies, is just waking up from the noise being made, so Puck quickly drops the magic juices into her eyes. When she fully awakes, she sees Nick Bottom, donkey head and all, and instantly falls in love with him. The two decide to take a nap in the woods together, while Puck, on his way back to King Oberon, finds Lysander and Hermia asleep. Puck is confused and thinks that Lysander is the man who needs the love drops. So Puck puts the love drops in Lysander's eyes, just as Helena is coming toward them into the clearing. Now Lysander is in love with Helena. Helena is very confused, and Hermia is very mad. She thinks her best friend has stolen her boyfriend. Puck doesn't know what to do. So, trying to fix the situation, he finds Demetrius and puts some love drops in his eyes too. So now Demetrius loves Helena as well. Helena is angry. She thinks the men are teasing her, while Hermia tries to fight Helena for stealing Lysander, and Oberon is mad at Puck for making so many mistakes.
"You'll have to stay up all night and fix this mess," Oberon says to Puck, and so he does. When the lovers wake up in the morning, Lysander loves Hermia, and Demetrius loves Helena. The lovers think that all the events that have happened must have been nothing more than a dream. Everyone is happy, and they go back to Athens to tell Aegeus and Duke Theseus. The Duke is delighted to see that everything has been settled, and decides to make a group wedding. In the meanwhile, Oberon reverses the spells on both Titania and Nick Bottom, who decides that he too must have been dreaming this whole time. No longer wearing a donkey's head, Nick Bottom heads back to Athens to perform the play with his friends for the group wedding. Once there, and given the lack of preparation, the play is so terribly performed that the audience thinks it's meant to be a comedy, and they laugh and clap all night long. The end. The Story of the Prince and the Pauper.
Tom Canty was the youngest son of a very poor family, living with the dregs of society in London. Although he always aspired to a better life, encouraged by the local priest who had taught him to read and write. One day, Tom was wandering around near Buckingham Palace when from the outside he sees the prince walking in the gardens. Tom, filled with curiosity, approached the palace gates, trying to sneak into the prince's affairs, but he was immediately caught by the royal guards, who prepared to give Tom a beating for daring to approach the prince. The prince, whose name was Edward, saw Tom being pushed around by the guards and cried out, "Stop!" Then he kindly invited Tom into his palace chambers. Tom was impressed by the luxury that existed in the palace. Once they arrived at the prince's chambers, the two boys got to know one another, and they were both fascinated by each other's life. Both Edward and Tom had very similar faces, and they were so curious as to how the other one lived that they decided to switch clothes and temporarily change lives. Edward left in a hurry so he would not get caught and headed straight to Tom's house, the one that soon would become his. Edward, posing as Tom, soon found himself trying to escape from the beatings from Tom's drunken father, just as Tom, who was posing as the prince, tried to cope with court customs and manners. People on the palace staff thought that the prince had contracted a sickness which caused him memory loss and feared he would go mad. But when asked for judgments, Tom, because he was a bright boy, gave sound and fair observations, which reassured people about his sanity. In the meanwhile, Edward walked around the streets of London by himself. There he met Miles Hendon, a soldier and nobleman returning from war, who asked Edward, "What are you doing down here by yourself, boy?" "Good morning, sir," Edward replied. "I'm actually the prince, trying to see the world from a pauper's perspective." Miles laughed and laughed, obviously thinking it was a joke.
"I needed that laugh, boy,"
Miles said.
"Thank you."
After some days, Edward was surrounded by a group of boys who were trying to rob him. Luckily, Miles Hendon saw it all and came to his aid.
"Go away from this boy if you don't want to get hurt," he threatened.
The boys ran away and never bothered Edward again, now that Miles was his protector. As Edward experienced the brutish life of a pauper firsthand, he became keenly aware of the stark class inequality in England. He saw the harsh, punitive nature of the English judicial system in dealing with the poor, where people were convicted on flimsy evidence, and he vowed to reign with mercy when he regained his rightful place. In the meanwhile, news reached them that King Henry VIII had died, and that Edward is to become king. Although grieving for his father, Edward decides to be strong and heads for the palace. In the palace, the coronation ceremony is actually taking place, and Tom is about to be proclaimed King Edward VI. Tom has been claiming repeatedly that he had traded places with the rightful prince, but no one believes him. Suddenly, Edward intervenes. I am Prince Edward, and the rightful heir to the throne." Tom is eager to give up all claims to the throne. However, the nobles refuse to believe that this beggarly child, standing in front of them, is indeed Prince Edward. "Here is the Great Seal of England," proclaims Edward, presenting the seal he had secretly carried with him after leaving the castle that fateful day. Now there were no doubts as to who the king was, and everything that had happened to each of the boys was explained. Edward was crowned King Edward VI, and he decided to reward Miles Hendon with the rank of Earl, and his family was rewarded with the right to sit in the presence of the king. In gratitude, Edward also named Tom Canty the king's ward. King Edward VI kept his vow of being rightful and fair, making the lives of the English people much better. The end. The story of the boy who flew too high. Daedalus was a brilliant architect and inventor. In fact, he was so brilliant that King Minos of Crete did not want to let him go back to his home in Athens. Instead, he kept him as a prisoner. Daedalus lived with his son Icarus in a tower of the palace, and King Minos made him invent weapons of war that would make his army and navy even more powerful than they already were. Although Daedalus and Icarus had every comfort they could ask for, Daedalus longed to return home to Athens. His son hardly remembered his home city, but he too wanted to leave, because he longed to run and play in the open rather than be in a tower all day. Daedalus looked out over the waves of the Mediterranean Sea, and he realized that even if they could manage to slip out of the tower and find a little boat, they wouldn't be able to sail very far before they would be spotted and caught by one of the ships of King Minos's navy. He thought for a long time about the best way to escape, and finally he came up with a plan, and this is what he did. He told King Minos that he needed feathers and wax for a new invention that he was working on. When these were brought to him, he took them up onto the roof of the tower. Here, he arranged them in 4 lines, starting with the smallest feathers and following those with the longer ones, so that they formed gentle curves. Then he began to stick the feathers together with thread in the middle and wax at the base. While he was working, Icarus played with the wax, squashing it between his finger and thumb, and when the feathers blew away in the breeze, he ran after them and caught them. When Daedalus had finished, he showed Icarus his work. He had made the feathers into 2 pairs of wings. He fastened the larger pair to his arms and began to flap them until his feet took off from the floor and he began to hover in mid-air. Icarus laughed with delight and could not wait to try out the smaller pair of wings. Over the next few days, father and son both practiced with them until little Icarus was almost as good at flying as his father. Then one morning, Daedalus said to Icarus, "Now, son, we are ready to leave this island for good. We shall fly home to Athens. But although you are now quite good at flying, you must not forget that it can be very dangerous. So listen to my instructions and be sure to follow them. At all times follow me, for I will find the way home."
Do not fly too low, or your wings will fill with moisture from the waves. They will become too heavy, and you will sink down, Daedalus said. Nor should you fly too high, for the sun will heat the wax, and your wings will fall apart. Have you understood all that I have said?"
Little Icarus nodded to show his father that he had understood. And then Daedalus led his son up onto the battlements of the tower, and like a bird leading her fledglings from the nest for the first time, he jumped into mid-air and flapped his wings, and Icarus followed soon after. If a fisherman or a shepherd had looked up just then, he would have seen two very unusual birds hovering above the waves. No doubt he would have thought that he had caught sight of two winged gods. Who could have believed that a mortal father and son had mastered the art of flight? Over the seas they sailed, and at first Icarus felt frightened, for he had never ventured very far in his practice flights. But soon he found that he was really good at flying. In fact, it was the most tremendous fun he ever had. He began to swoop up and down with the gulls. Wow, it was amazing. His father turned around and called,
"Icarus, be careful!"
And for a while after that, Icarus obeyed his father and flapped along behind him. But then his wings caught a warm air current, and he found that he could soar along and upwards almost without any effort. This was the life. He was floating ever so high above the waves, and the ships down below were like tiny little specks. His father called up to him,
"Icarus, remember what I told you. Come down right now."
But Icarus could not hear, and his father could not catch up with him. Icarus was way too close to the sun, and soon the wax that held the feathers together began to melt. Gradually, his wings began to lose their shape, and some of the feathers even began to fall off. Icarus flapped his arms frantically, but it was too late. He had lost the power of flight, and down he plunged into the sea, calling, "Father! Father!" But there was nothing Daedalus could do. Icarus managed to swim back to the shore, and Daedalus returned to land to be with his son. Of course, this meant that they were captured in the end and put back in the tower by King Minos. They were very disappointed that they could not return home to Athens, but the most important thing was that they were together again. And Icarus learned a valuable lesson. You should always listen to your parents. The end.